late 1970s, America as a nation was still a creditor nation. We had debts, but it was on balance, we were still a creditor nation, which we remained until the mid 80s. So there are many different things now, as far as we are concerned, we being the United States, and our situation is much, much worse. And these guys in Washington are making it very much worse every day. Not every month, every day, they're making it worse. Well, first of all, I would remind you that we have periodically had recessions since the beginning of time all over the world.
They're supposed to be a natural part of the economic cycle. We just try to really push them off if we can.
It always has been. I presume it always will be. But Janet Yellen said, who's the Secretary of the Treasury, said, no, we have figured it all out. Don't worry. We have it under control. Well, she's got degrees from a couple of fancy Ivy League schools. So if you believe her, then don't worry, Washington's sorted all this out now. I happen to know she's wrong, and I happen to know that we will have recessions again in the world, and the next one has to be very bad. But as I explained, 2008 was a nightmare for many of us, for many people. Since then, the debt has gone up by astonishing amounts. You cited some numbers before. Pick any numbers you want. They're terrifying. And it's continuing to get worse every day. So the next time we have a problem, I mean, Adam, it's just simple addition. Look out the window, the debt is skyrocketing everywhere. So the next problem has to be very, very bad. It'll be the worst in my lifetime. And I'm older than you, so it'll be the worst in your lifetime too. I didn't say it'd be the worst in the world, the worst in history or anything like that. I just said in my lifetime. No, I would cut government spending with an axe, not with an axe, with a chainsaw, because the situation is dramatic. It is historic, and I would stop printing money. I would let the market decide what kind of interest rates the world needs. You know, we've had 3 central banks in American history, Adam, as you know. The first 2 disappeared. This one is probably going to disappear too eventually because they keep making such horrible mistakes. So, but if I were doing it, I would get rid of the central bank. I'd let the market determine interest rates as it has in the past, and the world somehow survived. Yes, we had recessions, but we've had recessions since the beginning of time. In the Old Testament, they talked about 7 good years and 7 lean years. Mm-hmm. You know, you and I are not the first people to know that we have hard times sometimes in the world and in history. It's been going on for many decades, many centuries. These interest rates in the United States in 2022, by historic standards, are not high. They're higher than they were a year ago, but look back at the history of America, the history of any country, but since we're Americans, these are not high interest rates in American history. So they have the scope and the historic precedent to go much, much higher, which I suspect they will, for the reasons that we've discussed. And that will have a dramatic effect on housing. We have had a huge amount of home building in the last decade or so. I don't have the numbers at hand, but I know everybody has been building houses. Some would call that a bubble, but even if it's not a bubble, it has certainly been a boom. And when that comes to an end, you know, if your house goes down in price, it doesn't affect you too badly unless you have to sell or something. But then when your neighbors' houses start going down and your relatives' houses start going down, then you really feel the pressure, because you know, if I have to sell or whatever wealth I thought I had, I don't have anymore. And then people everywhere start talking about it, because, you know, one of the things that many people talk about are property prices, house prices. And if they start going down, it's going to be high on their list of things to talk about, much higher than the football game. If everybody's house price is going down, everybody's going to talk about it and moan and complain, which leads to more pessimism. Again, just look at the numbers and what has happened throughout history. Yes, we've had lots. I mean, I think unemployment has been the lowest in a long time in the U.S. When we start having problems, it goes from the lowest, it usually goes much higher. You know, things, when they get overextended on the downside, they get overextended on the upside. That's the way the world works. That's the way history works. So, no, of course, I would expect unemployment to go higher and higher. Just read some history. I'm not trying to scare people. I'm just telling you how the world has always worked.
Yeah.
This is the way the world has always worked, just as from the Old Testament, they had 7 good years and 7 bad years. I mean, this has been going on a long, long, long time. So don't listen to me. Just read some history, do your own research, and then you will get knowledgeable. And if you get knowledgeable, you will get worried, because you will see this has happened many times before, and it's going to happen again, as it always has. And those who are prepared and knowledgeable will do well and survive. Some people came out of the 30s very rich. Not me. I didn't come out of the 30s very rich, but some people did. So if you're prepared, you'll do fine. Well, first of all, the world has had many reserve currencies, international mediums of exchange in history. None of them have survived. None of them have lasted more than 100, 150 years or so. I'm delighted that the US dollar has been on top for many decades, but history would indicate that it's going to come to an end and that maybe it's time. I mean, we've been on top a long time for economic reasons. We are the largest debtor nation in the history of the world, so there are financial reasons for people to look for something else. There are also political reasons, as you aptly point out. You know, all of a sudden, I mean, if Washington gets angry at you, too bad, they cut you off. Or they confiscate your assets. They just take your assets. They say, okay, they're ours now. So as you point out, many people, including our friends, are starting to say, wait a minute, guys, wait a minute, this is not the way it's supposed to work. If I have an international medium of exchange, I should be able to use it for anything I want anywhere in the world. Well, it's sinking in to many people that there are many reasons to start looking for a competitor, and many major players in the world are looking for a competitor, something to compete with the US dollar. I don't like this, Adam, but I can see it happening, and we all have to adjust to it, whether we like it or not. I don't know. Normally, I would think it would be the Chinese currency, because for many reasons, but the Chinese currency is a blocked currency. I mean, I can go online and buy the euro if I want, or the US dollar. I cannot buy and sell the Chinese currency easily. So that's not a player at the moment anyway. Maybe that will change. So I don't know what it's going to be. If you know, please don't announce it on this program. Please send me a private email so that I can buy some too. I am looking for the new competitor to the US dollar, but it's happening. It's happening before our eyes if you bother to look, and it's going to be, I remember when the pound sterling lost its status as the reserve. You know, in 1920s, Britain was the richest, most powerful country in the world. It was number one. There was no number two. There was no rival in the 20s. 50 years later, 1976 to be precise, Britain was bankrupt. Literally, the IMF had to bail out Great Britain because they were bankrupt. They went from no competitor to total bankruptcy. So it has happened, it can happen, and it will happen to everybody eventually in the big scheme of history. And as I say, I don't know. By 1776, the dollar was rising strongly. It had a great play after the Second World War. But unfortunately, that play has been going on for a long time. It's usually a process. More and more people get affected as more and more measures get taken by the politicians to save you. They hurt you always, but it's usually a process. Now, eventually, it's like I can remember 1976 when Britain went bankrupt. It was on the evening news everywhere when that happened. But that process had been in train for several years, several decades. Well, the way things are going now, your latter scenario is more likely. I mean, there is the European scenario, there is the Asian scenario, there is the Western Hemisphere. There are varieties of spheres of influence that could be, because I don't see, in the 60s, the 50s and 60s, there was the US dollar because of what happened in the Second World War and after. So it was very clear who was riding up to replace the pound. I don't see that happening now. Yeah. So I would suspect it's going to be spheres of influence or spheres of currencies, if you want to look at it that way. And eventually one of them will come out on top, either after a war, or after its depression or something. Some kind of historic event will take place, somebody will then suddenly rise to the top over the various regions. Well, I read the same things you do. You don't have to have closed doors, bars or something. We all know the problems, the political and economic problems of the US dollar. It's not a secret. Everybody knows it, and everybody knows that people are looking. It's being accelerated. I mean, the Ukraine war has accelerated this surge because of what the US did. They just seized assets. They blocked assets of innocent people. They just said, we suspect something's up, and they seized their assets or blocked their assets. So many people, this movement is being accelerated by Washington's our actions, I hate to say. So yes, it just makes, and many people know that gold has been around for centuries. By the way, silver has been much more often used as the backing for currency throughout history. I mean, Jesus Christ was sold for 30 pieces of silver. Actually, the U.S. currency, when America was founded as a nation, the U.S. dollar was first backed by silver. It was a silver-backed currency in 1792 when we set up the monetary system, etc. So the silver has been around and more common. China in the 1930s was a silver-based economy. Many places have been silver, but it doesn't matter whether it's silver, gold, or seashells. People come up with something to back the currency. It makes sense because people, as I've explained before, what are we going to do? And people, they look around, they don't see anything else, so they say, well, why don't we back a currency with something real? Everybody knows what gold is, silver, wheat, whatever it happens to be. So it is a very likely scenario that people will try for a while, especially if we have more and more problems and crises. And eventually, a gold-backed currency has problems too. That's why they always get changed. And the politicians, it's too hard for the politicians. They say, oh my gosh, this is too hard. So they change the rules. They're always changing the rules. So then they will get rid of the gold standard again, or the silver standard, or whatever. But I do sense and see that they're opening up a bit. Yes. And of course that will help. China's been suffering in the last year or so from the virus and lockdown and the real estate bubble popping, which will badly affect anybody. And it is having an effect in China. And yes, if they open up, but still, when you go from total lockdown, to even total openness, it takes a while. People don't suddenly find themselves rich and spending a lot of money, especially if there's a real estate bubble popping. So no, China's not going to disappear. We in America became the most successful country in the 20th century, but my gosh, Adam, we had huge problems along the way. Civil War, many depressions, massacres in the streets. China will certainly continue to have problems. They will survive. I'm not giving up on China. It's not going to disappear. In 2008, they had a lot of money saved up. The world started collapsing, so they started spending. But when it started raining, the Chinese started spending the money. But now China even has a whole lot of debt. I don't see who can save us now. North Korea doesn't have any debt, but they're not big enough to save the world like China was in 2008 when they had staggering amounts of reserves. There's nobody that I can see. Not even the Federal Reserve, not even the central bank in America.